Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards.
If you're listening to this podcast, then you're in great company. We've got thousands of listeners who have a thirst for continual improvement and raising standards in business. Whether your interest is in quality, sustainability, or risk standards, I'd love to welcome you as a member to our online platform for all things ISO, the ISology Hub. The ISology Hub is the leading place to get access to all of your online resources, from in-depth training courses through to our very popular coffee break training, to templates and action plans and many other resources to help raise standards. As a member, you get access to over 100 courses, taking you from learner to practitioner to leader. The ISology Hub has all the resources that you need, which will really help to make your life easier and to help improve compliance in those business critical areas. So if you'd like access to learning and compliance resources ranging from data privacy to environmental management, anti-bribery, business continuity, quality, health and safety, to name just but a few, the list is endless actually, then we'd love for you to come and join us. Just head over to the isologyhub.com.
Hello everybody, welcome to another ISO show. My name's Ian Battersby. I'm one of the senior consultants with Blackmores UK Limited. I'm joined by Steve Mason, one of my colleagues at Blackmores here today. Everybody will probably be aware of the recent CrowdStrike issue, which hit many people across the world in the last few weeks. Steve's going to explore with me some of the implications for management system standards which have emanated from that particular event, and the sorts of things that we may need to consider on the back of it. So, Steve, welcome. Good to speak to you again.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, it's good to be back.
We talked a few weeks ago together, didn't we?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Firstly, could you give us a bit of background for people who don't know the ins and outs of this? What happened? And why is it important?
Right, yeah. Well, I think it's important to sort of cut through all the conspiracy theories that are out there, because obviously whenever anything like this happens, conspiracy theories arise. So I've waded through all that, got rid of that. I tend to rely on a gentleman called Graham Cluley for a bit of background. I listen to some of his podcasts. I think he's a very reliable source. And from him, I mean, it's obviously clear that CrowdStrike was all brought about through an update that simply brought down systems globally. And it was an outage that was bigger than the WannaCry outage we saw a few years ago. But in truth, only 8.5 million Windows systems were affected, which is actually less than 1% of Windows systems out there.
Interesting, isn't it? That doesn't seem like many people on a global scale. Is there a lesson in criticality here then? Or is it about connectedness?
I think it's about what's connected. I think all that 1% of Windows systems clearly had CrowdStrike as their key provider for antivirus and malware. So, and it's really where those systems were located in the world and what sort of services they were providing that gave us the biggest impact. So we think about, trains being stopped, airlines being stopped, operations in hospitals being stopped, lots of things like that. So there's lots of companies that rely on CrowdStrike. And when we look at it, just 1% of the Windows systems must have had CrowdStrike linked to it. So that's the reality. If we then look at CrowdStrike itself, best will in the world, they actually got a fix out in 30 minutes.
That seems quick.
Yeah, so their recovery was quick, okay. But the long-term recovery to fix all the computers affected I believe, was still going on for about 2 weeks after.
Right.
It may still be going on now. I don't know. I haven't caught up on that.
Well, it only takes that window, that short period, to cause this level of damage then.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think sometimes we forget this with business continuity, that an event happens, that might be a very short period of time in which we notice that happening. The recovery to get a fix might take, perhaps a few hours, but then the recovery to get our businesses back to where they should be may take weeks, may even take months. And I think sometimes people take a bit of a shortcut, a bit of a risk when they do their business impact assessments and say, oh yeah, we'll recover that in 48 hours. No, think again.
Right.
And to be quite honest, even if you're not a WannaCry user, CrowdStrike user.
Ooh, slip there, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. If you're not a CrowdStrike user, you should be learning lessons from this, okay? Because it could be that similar things happen to systems that are not CrowdStrike systems.
Okay, important then, yeah.
Absolutely. So, you could be a little bit complacent and say, oh, we don't use CrowdStrike. No, you do use some sort of system that could cause an outage. So learn from this, all right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason the fix took so long, or has been taking so long, is quite simply that it was a fix that couldn't always be pushed out from the central location.
Right.
It required engineers to go out and actually fix things on site. And I think it was Microsoft that actually said that in some cases, some computers may need up to 15 reboots before they've cleared the problem.
Wow, okay.
Now, you imagine how long a reboot takes. We've all been there.
Watching the dial go around, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. 15 reboots later, oh, we're finally fixed, so...
But it required physical attendance by engineers. We all seem to believe that fixes are done remotely these days, but that's not the case.
No, oh, no. There are some times where you can't do these fixes remotely, okay? This appears to be the case, and this appears to be why this has had a greater impact. So things like the airports and that, sending engineers out to those airports to fix systems took a few days, and that's why even about 5 days after the event, people could not get on aeroplanes, and having to rebook aeroplanes or extend their holidays. Oh, that's a wonderful thing, extending your holiday. But not so wonderful if you're at the other end waiting to go on holiday.
I'm sure we'll probably get onto the nuts and bolts, but for me that has a huge impact on how you plan for recovery then. How do you know in advance that any specific outage might lead to that form of physical intervention then?
Absolutely. I think this is where it comes down to the lessons learned activity. If you look at an event like this, irrespective of whether it affects you or not, do your lessons learned activity and understand, have we got similar systems to this? Yes, most of us got Windows. Some have got, obviously, Apple systems. But you need to look at, if that happened to us, how would it impact us? Have we got the resource to get engineers out there to fix this? And that's really what your recovery time should be based upon.
Yeah, maybe a worst case scenario being built into that as well then.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have to rely on a third party to provide support to you, just imagine 100 companies relying on that same third party.
Yes.
And sometimes it depends on how much you're paying that third party as to whether you're top of the list for getting the resource.
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah, and this is the problem we face with that one.
Indeed. So what's the impact then? If you're employing one of the management systems or a suite of the management system standards, what's the impact on those standards? What have we learned from this particular event that impacts back onto those?
Okay, I think I've looked at this, and there are certainly 3 key standards that would have been impacted by this event. Your business continuity standard, which is ISO 22301, because you'll be looking at your recovery times, your RPO, RTO, your business impact assessment. Was that effective enough? And what about your risk assessment in business continuity? Then you've got ISO 27001, which is information security. Again, risk assessment there, looking at the likelihood and the severity of the outage. There's BCP in 27000. There's ICT readiness now in 27,000. So it's all important to look back at that and say, well, how's that impacted us? Then finally, there's the 20,000-1, which is the IT Service Management Standard. And again, there are risk assessments in there. There is a requirement to look at service continuity, service availability. And also you'll have your SLAs with your customer. If you're providing a service to a customer that includes CrowdStrike, that includes Windows, did that outage impact you so that it impacted the service you deliver to your customers?
Well, this is entirely dependent on your supply chain as well, isn't it? That there may be a link within there which is dependent on something like CrowdStrike. And you've mentioned risk assessment. This becomes very difficult, doesn't it?
Yes.
We need to understand risk in the supply chain as much as in our own organisation. We're so interdependent, aren't we?
Very much so. And I think this is why more and more companies are calling on their suppliers to have standards in place so that we can all react quickly and effectively to any event like this that happens. I know in some cases, some organisations haven't got the bandwidth to put standards in place, but it doesn't mean they can't learn from those standards and put good practice in place based upon those standards.
Indeed. Now, how would we then use the management system to plot a path through the corrective action and then the improvement planning beyond that?
Right, okay. Well, first and foremost, anyone that's been affected by this should have raised an incident. And in some cases, that incident would have been a major incident, depending on the impact it has on your company. And incidents typically would be recorded in whatever system the company uses. It might be a continuous improvement log. It might be in a service desk system like ServiceNow or anything like that. Wherever you would record your incident, it must be recorded.
And I would suggest also, Steve, that even if you're not dependent on an information or BCP standard, that you should be recording this if you've got, say, 9001 in this instance, because it's an unexpected outcome and therefore defined under 9001 as a non-conformity, potentially, yeah.
You could argue in that sense you're recording it for continual improvement, your system. And I think even in 9001 there is a requirement to make sure that you can continually deliver quality to a customer, and obviously the quality of your product and service could be affected by the outage that has occurred.
Yeah. There are other systems as well. If, for instance, a lot of people's health and safety systems these days
Oh, yes.
are dependent on information systems, recording of accidents and the like, monitoring and measurement systems. Maybe your environmental management system is dependent on the monitoring of outputs, whether you're polluting or discharging things. They could well be affected, and you may have gaps in your data on that basis.
That's some very good points you're raising there. I hadn't thought about that. That's not my strong area in standards, but that's really good you brought that out. So that does widen this out.
It does, yeah.
To just being the three standards I first mentioned, how it can impact you.
And legislative impact in that if you are required to monitor outputs,
Yes, yeah.
that you may have a regulatory impact from that because you're not able to do it.
Yeah, and that might mean that within those risk assessments, within those standards, you're going to have to identify the impact of not being able to report regulatory requirements or legal requirements. So that's an important thing to take into account.
Yep, indeed.
Yeah, if we go back to the incident, one of the things that really comes out of the incident is that you should have a lessons learned, okay? And it's interesting that I think you need to look at 27 as a standard. It does say that we need to sort of think about the consequences of unplanned changes or unexpected changes. This is an unexpected change. It's a consequence. The change happened somewhere else. Okay, we're suffering the consequences. So we need to understand that. So if we do a lessons learned activity, we can actually focus much more on what needs to be changed within our business and in our management systems. If you don't do that, you'll just go shooting off in different directions and perhaps not actually fixing the real thing.
Given that this event occurred within many people's supply chain and they have no direct access to the information, that they're relying on information that's been put out quite publicly, I understand that the lessons learned can be done internally. But what about viewing down the supply chain and getting a lessons learned from that? Is it about the unpredictability of the supply chain and accounting for that?
Well, that's right. Yeah, I mean, if you sort of do your lessons learned and sort of think to yourself, actually, it's all down the supply chain. Well, don't forget, in 9,000 and in 27,000, there is a requirement for you to review your suppliers and the effectiveness of the service they're delivering. So that could be part of it. You could be sending out an email to your suppliers and saying, well, can you confirm that you've addressed this and you've put in everything you can to cover the risk and the impact at a later date. It's about working together in this case, really. We shouldn't be dealing with this alone. This needs to be a team effort across businesses. It's been an outage across businesses, so it's only going to be a team effort that's going to put it right again. Collaborative thinking.
This is interesting, yeah, because if you look at the history of 9001, for instance, which was based on products, it was, essentially developed for a sort of manufacturing environment originally, but has veered into services now.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
People still view that externally provided element quite a lot as, have your goods been received? Have you got them through the door and checked them, sort of thing? Goods aren't that anymore. Goods are coming through the supply chain of IT infrastructure and the like. Information is a supply, and people need to adapt their thinking to take that into account. And how do you then validate that supply?
Absolutely. It's about ensuring you've got that collaborative working. I think it's one of the 7 principles, isn't it? Mutually beneficial supplier relationships or external party relationships. That's what you're building to.
Yeah.
You should all be working towards the same goal, which is to actually keep the customer happy.
Indeed.
Are you new to ISO standards and want to know what it's all about? Or maybe your company has multiple ISO standards, but there's a lack of engagement and compliance. Whether it's quality, sustainability, or risk standards, the Isology Hub is your one-stop shop for all your online learning resources associated with raising your company's standards. From as little as £99 a month, you can have unlimited access to hundreds of online training courses and achieve certification for completion of courses along the way, which will take you from learner to practitioner to leader in no time. So what courses are in the Hub? Well, there are courses on everything a head of quality, sustainability, information security and health and safety would need to manage compliance and raise standards. With over 100 courses available to you, here are examples of just a few. ISO 9001 Internal Auditor, how to transition to the new ISO 27001 standard, the role of ESG in quality management, and how to integrate management systems. But it's not just courses in the Isology Hub. You can access templates, downloads, and action checklists to take your business to the next level. So why not try the Isology Hub today? Just click on the link at www.isologyhub.com and you'll get access to all our resources within minutes. If you're interested in embedding best practice across your organisation or would like to develop an awareness and training programme for employees, we offer a free learning and development session to tailor a bespoke training programme based on your organisation's needs. So we'd love for you to join as an Isology Hub member. Just head over to isologyhub.com to get access to your unlimited training and compliance resources.
So once you've looked at the root cause of what's happened and picked up on lessons learned from it being an incident or a non-conformity, where do you go from there? What's the impact back into the organisation from that?
Right. I think we need to look at the standard from the beginning. I mean, one of the first things any standard asks us to do is to understand the organization's internal and external issues. So that's understanding the context. Now, this is an external issue that could prevent an organization from delivering its management system outcomes. Now, whatever system companies use to identify those internal and external issues, they should be recording this as an issue. I mean, we use SWOT and PESTLE, and I know a lot of companies tend to use that. But it might be that you record this under a threat from the SWOT side and under technology on the PESTLE side.
Indeed.
And it's not just CrowdStrike. I think we need to put CrowdStrike stroke Microsoft outage. Because, it obviously came through Microsoft. Not that Microsoft are to blame in any of this. It's just...
No, you have to be careful about that sort of thing, yeah.
Yes, yeah. And I don't think this should be an exercise in blaming people. I think it should be an exercise in saying, right, it's happened. What have we learned from it? How do we move forward? I think those out there that are sort of getting on the blame wagon are just really sort of muddying the water and not doing anybody any favours.
Doesn't help, no.
No.
Doesn't help. Finding cause is what we're after and protecting against it in the future. Now, you mentioned it as being recorded as a threat. However, you may have to be brutally honest about your own organisation and identify it as a weakness in your own supply chain control. Potentially. Maybe not in this situation, but in future.
Yes, yeah. And it might be that the weakness is actually around your own recovery system in business continuity. Because if you haven't got 22301 in place, and then you were struggling to recover, does that then lead you to think, do I need that standard? Or do I need to learn from some of the ideas in that standard? Or do I need to really up the game in what I'm doing around business continuity? So, yeah, you're quite right. It does lead to a weakness.
And you say that standard, but again, regardless of which standards you're working with, this is an organisational issue potentially that should be reflected in the SWOT and PESTLE, which is across every standard that you're working with. Like you mentioned earlier, the ability of this type of event to disrupt the supply of product or service to your customer is not an IT issue. It's an organisational business issue, which is relevant to 9001 as much as it is to any other standard, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. And I think just as you said there about weakness, you could also, be honest with yourself. Where were your strengths in all of this?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Why not record those strengths? Because it could be that you could learn from your own strengths. What were we doing well to actually cause the fix of this to be less of an impact on us as an organisation?
Yeah, and that's a very important aspect, Steve, that people look at the negative aspects of improvement planning and non-conformity and incidents. But if you responded well, maybe not across the piece, but any area in which you responded well, you need to capture and build on that, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. And if the strength is how well and how quickly teams within the organisation responded to this incident, why not congratulate them? Why not say, well done, you've really done a great effort here. And that goes a long way to sort of building that loyalty and support within organisations.
Yeah. Recognition goes a long way, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned revisiting SWOT and PESTLE. I mean, we would recommend that on a very regular basis. It's unfortunate that sometimes you see SWOT and PESTLEs left for a good period of time. And you talk to people and they say, well, this has happened and that's happened and all sorts has changed and we've bought another company and we've downsized or upskilled this portion of them. We've bought this system, and then it's, well, where's that in your SWOT and PESTLE? Well, we haven't got round to that yet.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's important to keep on top of that side of things, isn't it?
Yeah, in fact, your SWOT and PESTLE should almost be a log that is sitting in all your meetings.
Yeah.
And should be capturing that information. Even if you have SWOT and PESTLes around sort of local meetings, and then you bring out the key issues into a main sort of company SWOT and PESTLE.
Yeah, escalate them to strategic level. Mm-hmm.
Yes. In fact, if I remember rightly, there's a podcast some way back in the Blackmores podcast where one organisation sort of promotes the use of the SWOT and PESTLE. The director concerned had been a bit sceptical about SWOT and PESTLE until he used it and he realised what benefit it brought him as a company.
If you use actively, yes.
Yeah, so it's worth anybody looking back over there. I think it's around about podcast 53. Don't test me on that one.
Before my time, maybe, but I may well go back and look at it. Because I am a fan of this. I am a fan. Now, what you've mentioned already, and one of the things that ought to fall out of the SWOT and PESTLE is risk assessment, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So what should we be looking at when it comes to risk assessment on the back of this?
Okay, perhaps before we get to risk assessment, we need to also ask ourselves, how has this impacted our interested parties?
Ah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, because in my head now, following the standard through,
You're going logically, yes.
I'm going logically, yeah. You know me, I'm very logical.
If only there was a high-level structure we could follow for that logic.
Yeah. Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful? Yeah. So we got our interested parties, and did this outage cause us to fail to meet their needs and expectations? Okay. And this might sort of give us just a bit more understanding of whether our systems were robust enough or effective enough to meet those needs and expectations. And it might give us a bit of a shopping list of what we need to look at in our business, like a risk assessment, a business impact assessment, recovery plans, DR plans, service continuity, service availability, all those sorts of things. So don't overlook your interested parties' needs and expectations. There could be a bit of a gold mine there to dig to give you some sort of focus on what you need to do to improve.
Yeah, and again, ironically, an area which is often overlooked.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the need to keep these sorts of things up to date is so important. Your management system, when you do a lot of these activities, are not one-off activities.
No.
And this is where companies seem to think, oh, yeah, I've done that. I don't need to do that again. No, it is an activity you need to be repeating on a regular basis. How regular is entirely up to you as an organisation, but it must be repeated. Otherwise, your system becomes stale, it becomes ineffective, and people lose interest in it.
And unfortunately, people's sort of attitude towards management review sometimes is that it's a one-off annual event, and the SWOT and PESTLE and the interested parties are submitted, signed off, and left till the next year's management review. And that's not the meaning of the standard, really, is it? The context is important.
Yeah, management review is actually a process. It's not an activity. If we look at management review as a process that continues throughout the year, then we get that right. So, yeah. But you mentioned earlier about risk assessment. How might this sort of think about risk assessment? I mean, most companies hopefully follow the traditional method, which is laid down in ISO 31000, which would include the likelihood, impact and severity scoring. And in the light of this outage and any other event, the likelihood and impact scores should be updated. So not just this event, any event that happens within your organisation that comes out of an incident, why not have a look at your impact and likelihood scores?
And I would liken this to a health and safety style risk assessment. If there is an accident in the workplace, the immediate investigation of that should look at whether the risk assessment was actually relevant, was appropriate to the circumstances, and was being followed. That's the thing.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So if an organisation has sort of put an outage like this, that's likely to happen every 5 years, it should now seriously be considering changing that to once every 6 months, or even once every year, just at this stage, so they can then monitor progress. What they need to be monitoring is their confidence growing in the ability for this not to happen again. And so by putting down to every 6 months or once a year, you might see your risk score go up. As we know with risk assessment, you don't have to put every single risk right. And it could be that you get a high risk and management say, we're going to accept that risk because we're only monitoring the risk.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I've seen that, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, it doesn't give you more work to do. It just simply acknowledges that there's a risk and management can accept that risk, okay?
As long as they're aware.
Absolutely. And think about the other score, the impact score. Some organisations do their impact around finance.
Mm-hmm.
How much does this cost your organisation to put right. Each department may have been involved. Think about those engineers going out to fix the problem. Talk to finance, talk to other departments, understand the costs
Mm-hmm.
of updating this outage, and that should be reflected again back in your risk assessment. Whether that risk assessment has come out of your SWOT and PESTLE, or whether it's come out of any other form of risk assessment you do. Certainly in ISO 27001, you've got your information and data risk assessment. So you need to make sure that you pick this up in there, all right?
Yes.
So this gives us a much broader picture we're now working on, okay? And it also means that your risk assessment becomes live.
That's it, isn't it? Not one of those documents you pop in a drawer or put on a SharePoint folder and leave until the next year.
Exactly, yeah. And it does bring me back to that point of identifying the consequences of unintended changes.
Yeah. And going back to that point on risk assessments being live, if you're running any of the management system standards, there is a requirement within them to monitor whether you are attending to the risks that you've identified.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, typically, I tend to, when I'm helping people put management systems together, I tend to encourage them to say, right, okay, if you've got actions coming out of this, why not recall those actions as strategic objectives to be improved? Or as, if they're short actions, very quick actions, stick them into your continuous improvement log. As long as you're telling a story and you link things together, it's going to work for you.
It is. And we mentioned the positive aspects here earlier. You may well have done something which should be put in your strengths section in your SWOT and PESTLE. There may be opportunity from this. We have to remember always that risk and opportunity go together. So you may be able to identify an opportunity which has come from particularly good to defence in these circumstances against disruption.
Yes, very much so. And that opportunity might be that you realise that one person's got some particular skills and knowledge, so why not train the rest of your staff up to that level of skill and knowledge if it's appropriate? It might be that you had a particular piece of software application in place that enabled you to put things right quicker. All that sort of thing. So, yeah, recognise that, yes, there are opportunities. Another opportunity might be that decide you want to move away from CrowdStrike and you want to move elsewhere. But remember, if you do that, you're not really moving away from the problem. You're moving into another area that could also have a problem.
Indeed.
And I always hold this sort of thing that if an organisation has been through a big, serious outage like this, I doubt if they're going to let it happen again because there's egg on their face.
Yeah.
They're embarrassed, and they're going to work damn hard to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, embarrassment's a good driver.
Absolutely, yeah. I do feel for the CEO of CrowdStrike. I do understand that it must be incredibly embarrassing, situation. But I do hope that they learn from this and they do what we're talking about here: lessons learned, put it right, prevent it happening again.
Indeed. But also that the world is such that there are enough bad actors out there who are intent on causing disruption to all forms of your supply chain. So this is a lesson, potentially. This didn't cause such a serious outcome as it could have, and there are potentially more serious outcomes, then this sort of event can help us to protect against those.
Absolutely. I think we rely so much on technology nowadays that this sort of outage, the worst case scenario, would lead to, not sort of overplaying it, but it could lead to unrest within society and things like that. And that's really where we should all be working for, is making sure that doesn't happen.
If you undermine the infrastructure of society, then the consequences can be quite stark, I imagine, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So really, organisations should be taking that step back, looking at the risk assessment tools that they have in place, making sure they're live. Go back to your business impact assessments that you've been doing for BCP. Look at those and make sure that your recovery times are right. Don't just turn around and say, look, we're going to recover within 48 hours, when in reality, the recovery time could be taking 2 weeks or could be taking a month.
Indeed.
I remember reading some time back that for 1 day outage, you need about a week to recover.
Right.
For 1 week's outage, you need about a month to recover. Admittedly, it's a bit of a sort of ballpark figure, but it gives you a bit of a measure to work on, and a reality measure. And look at this. What was this outage? The outage went on for some time, didn't it? And we're still recovering now. So let's say the outage was about a week.
Yep.
Okay. We're still recovering now. We're still a month on. So unlucky for me, it was when I was on holiday that I heard the outage. And of course, my brain started working when I should have been...
relaxing. Yes, indeed.
Relaxing, yeah. Switch off.
Yeah, I'd worked in contingency and business continuity planning in the NHS many years ago, in the run-up to the year 2000, in fact. And looking at organisations' plans, they were ever hopeful that they could rely on something that they'd never actually tested might work.
Yes, yeah. I think that's my final message from this would be, make sure your management systems reflect reality and not aspiration.
That's a fabulous line to potentially end on there, Steve, I think. Unless you have any other sage knowledge to share with us before we end.
No, I think that's me done for this, and hopefully it's been helpful to people just to listen through this and just realise that your management system that is there to help you and support you. Use it wisely.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you to everybody listening. Always fascinating talking to Steve. He really knows his stuff, so it's been a pleasure. And thank you all again. We'll see you at a future ISO show.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.